This video is about failure. It's what happens when pollsters miss the outcome of an election. How did they get it wrong? A lot of people ask, and it's a very good question. Well, there's a few explanations for it. First of all, in the old days when I started into this game, polling was a fairly easy thing to do. You did put out a telephone survey, you had a random probability sample, you went out and did a series of interviews, you had a response rate of like 70% on any poll that you did. It was actually pretty hard to get it wrong. It's pretty easy to get it wrong these days. All sorts of different methodologies for doing polling, but also combine that with the fact that partisanship isn't what it once was. People move back and forth between parties and among parties, and also the turnout in election campaigns goes up and down. And as turnout changes, it can have a really profound impact on the election. So really, pollsters, I think, are pretty good at predicting how people are going to vote, but they're not necessarily great, at least so far, in terms of predicting which people are actually going to turn out. And when you end up in volatile elections, and we've seen a lot of volatile elections recently, it gets harder and harder to actually nail down that group of the population that's going to vote. Because you know what? They're not the same as the general population, which is typically the way that we look at surveys. The voting population is different. The voting population tends to be a little bit older in most cases, tends to be a little bit more established, tends to have higher incomes, has a higher interest level in public affairs and public issues. To simply try and capture the general population doesn't reflect that voting population. So the question is, how do we figure out turnout? How do we do a better job so we don't see some of the misses that we've been seeing recently? Well, there's a couple of different ways of doing it. One of them is with questionnaire design and with modeling. So asking a series of different questions about people's engagement in the political process, their habits over time, whether they've voted in previous elections, and also their level of interest in this specific campaign. Because if elections are volatile, you're going to want to figure out how much people are into the campaign that's going on at the moment. The next thing is we really need to look at comparing the voting population to what you have in your survey. If you're weighting it to the general population, you're probably not reflecting the true voting population. So it's important to look at things like exit polls, for example, to go back over time and to see who the people are who are really voting. And we need to do a better job of matching up those two populations. The third thing, and we had a lot of success with this in the US election, is really modeling different turnout scenarios. So once you've asked the right questions, once you've got a good reflection in the demography of and your weighting in terms of who the people are that are voting, then it's who's going to turn out. So modeling different scenarios of voting is a good way of doing that. This all sounds pretty complicated, but it's something that I think anybody who's going to be publishing a poll about an election needs to find out a little bit about. Because quite frankly, every time you publish a prediction as to what the election is going to come out as, you're actually taking ownership for that prediction if you're in the media. So I think it's perfectly reasonable for any media outlet to ask a pollster how you came up with that prediction. What are the data? How did you model it? How did you account for turnout? How did you look at the population who's supposed to be voting that forms the basis of your prediction? And if somebody tells you that they've got a secret sauce or a proprietary way of doing it, that's not on. They have to be able to reveal to you how they came up with their conclusion. And I understand we have proprietary methods of doing things that we do at Ipsos. Other pollsters have the same sort of proprietary methods. But you know what? If you ask me to walk you through how we've done it, I'll always do it, provided you keep it confidential. And any other pollster should be prepared to do the same thing. Now let's get on to the question of aggregators and different types of modeling methodologies that we've seen over the last little while. There was a lot of hoopla in the United States about how well the aggregators did in the last election. First of all, the United States is probably just about the only place in the world that can pull this off successfully. And that's because there is so much polling going on that there's enough good polls to push out the bad polls. So people who are doing aggregation have a lot more data to work with, more than just about any other democracy. But the truth is, the word that I mentioned there is the really important word, polls. If the polls are off, all of the aggregations are going to be off. And if the polls are off, any type of modeling, whether it's a seat model or a constituency model, is going to be off. So it's really, really important that we really nail down what the polls should be. And you should walk through those questions of turnout and how turnout is modeled, because ultimately that's really going to affect the accuracy of everything that you're trying to predict, whether it's the actual outcome of the election in terms of vote percentages, or maybe seat models or electoral college votes or whatever it is that you're looking to calculate in terms of the outcome of the election. And any pollster who's working on that election should be prepared to walk you through how they're doing their modeling, how they're coming up with their results, because you know at the end of the day, you and your readers and your viewers have a right to know.